They laughed when she stepped onto the range. A quiet librarian with an old wooden bow. No logos, no spotlight. But when the silence fell, one arrow flew, and it changed everything. This is the story of Emily Grant. She didn't come to prove a point, but she left with a championship and a lesson they'd never forget. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees, casting golden rays onto the weathered porch of a small log cabin nestled in the foothills of Colorado. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of wood smoke and wild sage. Birds chirped lazily in the distance as Emily Grant, 34, stood at her kitchen counter, pouring hot coffee into a faded ceramic mug that read, "Read more, worry less." She wore a flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans and thick wool socks. Her chestnut hair was tied back in a loose braid that had started to unravel, strands curling around her temples. Despite the peaceful morning, her eyes betrayed a restless energy, like something long dormant had begun to stir. On the far wall of her kitchen hung a series of old black and white photographs. One showed her grandmother, June Grant, poised mid-draw with a traditional longbow in an open field, jaw tight, eyes locked on an unseen target. Another showed Emily at 10, awkwardly holding the same bow, a wide grin on her face and freckles scattered across her cheeks. Emily sipped her coffee and stared at the bow now resting across her kitchen table. Her grandmother's bow, an heirloom carved from yew wood, its grain smooth and darkened by decades of use and polish. She'd rest-wrung it herself last week, after almost 5 years of neglect. The bow looked simple, no sights, no stabilizers, no modern gadgets, but it held a quiet weight, like it remembered every arrow ever loosed. Her phone buzzed. "Dad, you sure about this, kiddo?" Emily smiled faintly and typed back, "I'm not doing it for them, Dad. Just need to try." She set the mug down and walked to the window. Below the hill, her beat-up green Subaru sat in the gravel driveway, already packed with her quiver, arrows, a canvas mat, and a small folding stool. She'd registered for open lane time at Iron Peak Archery Center, a place known more for sponsored athletes than small-town librarians with vintage gear. Emily took a breath and turned back to the bow. She reached out and ran her fingers along the smooth wood, stopping at a small inscription carved into the handle. "Stand still, then aim." Her grandmother had taught her that less about archery, more about life. She unlatched the carrying case and carefully packed the bow inside. No matter what happened at the range, today wasn't about winning. It was about stepping into the light after years of hiding in the shadows. She wasn't a champion or an influencer or someone with fancy equipment and followers. She was just Emily Grant. But she could shoot. She always could. With one last glance at her home, Emily grabbed her coat, slung the case over her shoulder, and walked out the door. The screen door creaked shut behind her, followed by the low hum of the engine as she turned the key in the ignition. The Subaru rolled down the dirt road, a trail of dust lifting behind it like the past finally letting go. Iron Peak Archery Center stood like a glass and metal fortress at the edge of town, nestled against a bluff that overlooked the valley. The sleek, modern structure gleamed under the mid-morning sun. All polished steel beams, expansive glass walls, and crisp white signage. It looked more like a Silicon Valley headquarters than a place to shoot arrows. Emily parked her Subaru beside a line of spotless trucks and glossy black SUVs. She took a moment, staring at the tinted windows reflecting the sky, before killing the engine. Her old car chirped as she locked it, the only sound on the otherwise silent lot. Slipping the strap of her case over one shoulder, she made her way to the front entrance, stepping carefully between patches of decorative stone and manicured gravel. Inside, the building smelled of industrial cleaner and new leather. Screens behind the reception desk flashed slideshows of young athletes mid-draw, smiling, sculpted, logo-covered. Banners hung from the ceiling bore the names of corporate sponsors and past champions. A young man with a buzz cut and perfectly pressed polo shirt looked up from his desk as Emily approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, eyeing her canvas case and hiking boots with barely disguised curiosity. "I'm here for open practice," Emily replied evenly. He tilted his head. "Are you registered?" "I booked online." "Emily Grant." The man tapped a few keys, brows raised in mild surprise when her name came up. Right? You requested lane 6, Olympic standard distance. His eyes flicked down to the case again. You brought your own bow? She nodded. You'll need to sign a waiver. Also, just so you know, most of the long-distance lanes are reserved for intermediate to advanced shooters. If you're not comfortable, we do have beginner targets available. I'm comfortable, she said, taking the clipboard from him. He handed her a lanyard and wristband. Lane 6, down the corridor, take a left. As she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her back. Not with threat, just doubt. Doubt wrapped in courtesy, but doubt all the same. The indoor range was enormous. The polished hardwood floor was divided by glass partitions and lined with high-tech sensors. A hum of quiet chatter and faint music played overhead, broken only by the rhythmic thwack-thwack-thwack of arrows hitting foam targets. Overhead lights cast an even glow across the lanes. Lane 6 was at the far end, and as Emily approached, she passed groups of young men and women in compression sleeves, fitted jerseys, and $1,000 bows mounted on carbon tripods. Some glanced at her with bored disinterest. Others smirked. At lane 5, a group of 3 stood talking. A tall man with a jaw like a magazine ad and a USA archery patch on his shoulder. A girl with a ponytail of perfect curls. And a wiry guy in a hoodie with Holland Archery printed across the front. As Emily set her case down and unzipped it, the tall man, Zach Holland, she recognized from online, glanced over. Hey, he called casually. You sure you're in the right lane? Emily didn't look up. Pretty sure, he chuckled. That's a traditional longbow, right? You know this lane's set for 70 meters. She nodded. That's the plan. There was a pause, followed by a snort from his friend. Damn, you're brave. Or stubborn. Zach tilted his head, half amused. No shame in starting closer, you know. Might save yourself some frustration. Emily calmly finished assembling her bow. She laid out her quiver, took a small notebook from her backpack, and made a few notes under her breath. Zach leaned a little closer. Or is this some kind of viral challenge? One arrow to prove them all wrong. He grinned. You got someone filming? No, Emily said quietly. Just me. A new voice chimed in from farther back. She's probably just here to relive some Lord of the Rings fantasy, joked another archer. Laughter rippled through the nearby lanes. Emily remained silent. She tightened the bowstring, tested its tension, and took a deep breath. The air felt heavier now, but not unfamiliar. She'd been here before, in spirit. All her life, people had mistaken quiet for weakness. They always did, until they heard the arrow fly. Emily stood still. In lane 6, she felt like an island, surrounded by synthetic fabrics, glossy risers, stabilizers, clickers, and confidence that came more from brand sponsorship than hard-earned skill. Her longbow, by contrast, was a relic, bare wood, aged curves, a hand-wound grip polished smooth by time. She unwrapped the cloth roll of arrows and laid them out neatly beside her quiver. The shafts were cedar, hand-fletched in her cabin, their tips sharpened and inspected one by one. No shortcuts, no excuses, just discipline. Her fingers grazed the carved initials near the nock of each arrow. J.G. June Grant, her grandmother's mark, a silent blessing on every shot. Emily stretched slowly, rolling her shoulders, her body remembering the rhythm like an old lullaby. She reached for the first arrow, knocked it in a single fluid motion, then stepped onto the firing line. Lane 6 was quiet now. Zach and his friends had gone oddly silent too, still watching, still smirking, but their words held back, waiting for a punchline that hadn't arrived. Emily inhaled through her nose. Her vision narrowed, locking onto the distant target. 70 meters. Her left hand gripped the bow. Her right fingers curled around the string. No release aid, no mechanical help, just muscle memory. She raised the bow with calm precision, letting her breath settle. The entire world shrank into that narrow lane. The feel of the string against her fingertips, the weight of breath in her chest, the pull slow and steady. Draw, anchor, hold. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. Still your thoughts. Count your breath. Let the arrow fly itself. The room seemed to freeze. Then release. The arrow whispered through the air, slicing the silence. Thwack. A clean, centered hit, just off the inner gold ring. A murmur rippled behind her. Emily didn't react. She calmly stepped back, noted the shot in her journal, then picked up the next arrow. Her second shot flew straighter, tighter, this time brushing gold. By the third, whispers turned to mutters. Was that luck? Someone mumbled from 2 lanes down. Zach's voice returned, louder now. Okay, not bad, he said. But let's see how long you can keep that up with wood and string. Emily didn't answer. She fired again. Thwack. Bullseye. Then another. And another. 5 arrows. 5 clustered hits within the gold. The snide comments had stopped. The laughter had dried up. Zach now leaned on the barrier between their lanes, arms crossed, jaw tight. He watched her shoot a 6th dead center. Okay, he said slowly. Who are you? Emily lowered her bow and turned just enough to meet his eyes. Someone who's been doing this, she said quietly, since before hashtags existed. He stared at her, uncertain whether to be insulted or impressed. The girl in the curls whispered something behind him, but Zach didn't respond. He was watching Emily now, not with contempt, but with something closer to confusion, or caution, because for the first time that day he knew she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there because she could hit the target when it mattered. The room's tone had shifted. The rhythmic thwacks of arrows from other lanes continued, but the buzz around lane 6 had grown quieter, tighter. A few archers had subtly paused their own routines, angling just enough to glimpse the woman with the vintage longbow who kept hitting gold. Emily kept to her rhythm, unmoved by the gathering stares. She recorded each shot, notes on wind drift, stance pressure, anchor tension, scribbled neatly into the notebook she'd used since college. The paper was stained at the corners and curled with time, but every entry was sharp and deliberate. Then, the voice returned. Zach. He leaned forward on the partition between their lanes, arms folded, but now there was a flicker of something new behind his smirk. Uncertainty. All right, he said, loud enough to catch attention from the nearby lanes. We've all seen your consistency, but here's the thing, real archers test themselves under pressure. Emily didn't respond. She was setting her last arrow, moving with the calm of someone shelling peas or tying her boots. Zach continued, how about a challenge? His words halted a few shooters around them. Heads turned. Emily raised an eyebrow, not looking up. Zach grinned. 1 arrow, 1 target, 70 meters, smallest gold ring. Miss, and you treat us all to drinks at the clubhouse tonight. Emily finally looked at him. And if I hit it? Zach shrugged, as if he hadn't planned for that. Then I don't know. You tell me. She studied him a moment. Fine, she said. You miss and you take a lesson with me. No gear, no gadgets. Just your hands, your breath, and a bow. There was laughter from behind Zach. His curly-haired friend again, snorting into her hoodie sleeve. Zach hesitated, then offered his hand. Deal. Emily didn't shake it. She simply turned toward the target and stepped into position. The range quieted. Even the ambient music dimmed in her mind. She stood still for a long moment, longer than any of her previous shots. Then slowly, she raised her bow. Her fingers moved with practiced grace. The string drew back. Her shoulder rotated. Her cheek found its place on the string. Her breath fell into sync with the beat of her heart. 1 arrow. Through the scope on Zach's training monitor, everyone could see the gold ring, just barely the size of a quarter from that distance. Emily released. Thwip, thwack, dead center. A few people gasped. Others just stared. Zach froze. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. For several long seconds, he stood motionless, like a chess player 5 moves deep into checkmate. Emily exhaled slowly and lowered her bow. Guess you've got a lesson to take, she said. Then she walked off the line, leaving behind the echo of that perfect strike and a room full of silence. The back room at Iron Peak wasn't usually used for lessons, especially not ones led by a woman in hiking boots with a longbow from another century. But Zach showed up, and so did 4 others from the range who'd watched that perfect shot and decided they couldn't ignore it anymore. Emily stood near the center of the room, bow in hand, surrounded by a semicircle of skeptics-turned students. The walls were lined with targets at 15 meters. No scopes, no tech, just instinct. Zach had left his compound bow in its case, as instructed. In its place, he held a borrowed wooden recurve. His grip looked unsure, his stance rigid. He stared at it like it might betray him. "All right," Emily began, her tone even. "We're not going to talk about hitting bullseyes today. We're going to talk about hitting stillness." Zach raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" She walked to his side. "It means you're not just aiming the arrow. You're aiming yourself." The others were quiet now, curious. Emily demonstrated a slow draw, letting her breath guide the motion. Her shoulders dropped. Her fingers brushed the string with the kind of delicacy usually reserved for turning old pages in a library book. "When you draw, don't fight the bow. Let it pull you into stillness. Then you release. Not from pressure, but from calm." Zach mimicked her motion, clumsily. The string twanged. The arrow flew left, nowhere near the target. He groaned. "This is like learning to walk again." Emily smiled faintly. "Exactly." She moved from archer to archer, adjusting posture, correcting elbow angles, guiding breathing. She didn't bark commands. She didn't show off. She simply observed, nudged, and let her students make discoveries on their own. At one point, Zach asked, "So how long did it take you to get this good?" Emily thought a moment. "Depends what you mean by good. I've been shooting since I was 9, but I didn't get quiet until my 20s. "Quiet?" She nodded. "In here." She tapped her temple. "You can't force stillness. You have to practice letting go." Later, after a particularly clean shot by one of the younger students, Zach turned toward her, sweat on his brow. "I thought you were just some hobbyist when I saw you walk in," he admitted. Emily didn't gloat. "You saw what you expected to see." He exhaled. "Yeah, I did. Most people do," she said, then added gently. "Until they don't." He didn't argue. For the first time that day, he looked like a student who truly wanted to learn. The next morning, a photo began circulating online. A grainy cell phone snapshot taken just seconds after Emily's arrow had struck dead center. Her expression calm, her grip relaxed. Zach Holland in the background, staring slack-jawed in disbelief. Someone had captioned it, "Longbow Librarian School's National Champion." By noon, it had been reposted across local archery forums and small-town Reddit threads. By evening, it reached a niche sports blog that ran with the headline, "Unknown Shooter Challenges Modern Archery Culture with a 40-year-old bow." Emily didn't know any of this. She was back at her cabin, hanging laundry outside and humming a tune her grandmother used to sing. She hadn't posted a single thing. She hadn't filmed a single moment. It wasn't about that. But Iron Peak had changed. When she returned 2 days later, her usual walk across the polished floor was different. Fewer side glances, fewer smirks. Some even nodded at her. And Zach? He was already at lane 6, stretching and adjusting his form with a focus she hadn't seen before. When she stepped onto the line beside him, he looked over, not with mockery, but with measured respect. "You ever think about competing?" he asked after his second shot thudded just shy of gold. "I am," she replied. "That's why I came here. The regional tournament's next week." Zach whistled softly. "You've got a shot. A real one." Emily smiled faintly, not answering. He glanced at her again. "You know, I never thought someone like you." She looked at him sideways. "I mean," he caught himself, "I just never imagined learning this much from someone outside. All this." He gestured vaguely to the range, the building, the whole corporate chic archery world they stood in. "You shoot like it's sacred," he added. "Not a sport. Something else." Emily nodded slowly. "It is sacred." Then she turned back to her target. That afternoon, she taught another quiet lesson. this time to a small group of girls visiting with their school's outdoor club. Emily showed them how to nock arrows, how to breathe with focus, how to treat the bow like an extension of themselves. She didn't talk about scores or sponsors. She just reminded them what her grandmother once told her. It's not the arrow that wins. It's the calm behind it. By the time the girls left, 2 had asked where they could find a bow like hers. The sun rose soft and golden over the tournament field. Rows of white canopies lined the grassy clearing, fluttering in the breeze. Dozens of archers milled about, adjusting sights, tuning releases, whispering to coaches. The scent of sunscreen and cut grass hung in the air, mingled with the dry hum of anticipation. Emily stood alone near the edge of the field, tying her braid tighter beneath her cap. Her canvas case rested at her feet. She wore no team colors, no patches, no coach beside her. Just a quiet focus wrapped in flannel and dusted with determination. Zach walked past with a clipboard in hand, nodding once. Lane 12, 3rd heat. You've got this. She gave him a faint smile. Thanks. As her heat was called, she stepped forward to the line. Flanked by archers with composite risers, laser-cut stabilizers, and digital clickers that beeped in perfect rhythm. Some glanced at her bow with amusement, others with curiosity. The target was 70 meters away, standard Olympic distance. The gold ring barely visible in the morning light. The whistle blew. Emily knocked her first arrow. Thwip thwack, just off-center. Second shot. Thwip thwack. Slight wind adjustment. Tight group. 3rd, 4th, 5th. The rhythm returned like an old song. Each arrow flew with precision born not of ego but of years spent aiming under open skies, chasing silence and legacy. With each release, she felt her grandmother beside her again. One hand on her shoulder, her voice in the back of Emily's mind. You already belong. Just prove it to yourself. The scoreboard updated slowly, heat by heat, group by group. By the end of the 3rd round, Emily ranked 4th overall. By the end of the semifinals, she was 2nd. A stunned hush fell when her name was announced over the PA system. Emily Grant advances to the final bracket. Lane 3. Spectators who had once ignored her now watched her every move. Archers she'd never met before whispered her name. The nickname had spread too. The longbow librarian. Her final opponent was a 3-time regional medalist named Cara Liu, a sleek, confident competitor with sponsor logos down both sleeves and a bow worth more than Emily's car. But when they stood side by side at the firing line, only one thing mattered: the arrow, the wind, the silence between the breath and the release. Emily loosed the first shot. Thwack, gold. Cara answered, gold. They traded bullseyes like poker chips. Shot after shot. Tension coiled in the air like wire. And then, on the final shot, Cara's arrow veered. Not by much, but enough. Emily didn't celebrate. She simply exhaled. And somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "She did it." The applause was polite at first, then grew slow and rising like wind through pines. Emily stood still at the firing line, her bow lowered, her breath steady. Judges in crisp polos confirmed the scores with clipped voices, then raised a small white flag above her lane. The announcer's voice crackled over the speakers. Champion of this year's Colorado Regional Archery Open, Emily Grant. She blinked once, twice, not quite processing it. Not because she hadn't believed she could win, but because she hadn't come for the trophy. Still, there it was. Zach appeared at her side moments later, grinning, clipboard forgotten. "You did it," he said, out of breath as if he had been the one competing. "You just did it." She glanced at him sideways. Wasn't trying to prove anything. He laughed. "You didn't have to. You reminded people what this sport used to be." The awards were presented under a white canopy, with rows of folding chairs and a few local news cameras rolling in late. Emily stood on the makeshift podium, flanked by Cara Liu and a younger teen archer who had placed 3rd. As the gold medal was placed around her neck, a hush fell, not out of tradition but reverence. This woman, who no one had heard of last week. This librarian with a longbow and no brand endorsements. this steady hand in a quiet storm. She didn't raise her arms, didn't bow. She just smiled softly and nodded once. Later that day, in the cool shade behind the tents, Kara approached her while sipping from a paper cup. "You could have joined any team after today," she said. "Even mine. You ever think about that?" Emily tilted her head. "I think about what matters most." "And what's that?" She looked out at the empty field, the targets already being packed away. "Passing it on," she said, "making sure girls out there, quiet ones, stubborn ones, know they belong here too." Kara studied her for a long beat, then held out her hand. "Well, thanks for the lesson." Emily shook it. "Anytime." That evening, back at her cabin, Emily placed the medal not on a shelf or in a case, but beside a photograph of her grandmother, June, still poised mid-draw. She lit a small candle and whispered, "We did good." Then she stepped outside into the starlit quiet, bow in hand, and let an arrow fly into the woods just to hear that old, familiar sound. Whistle, thwip, thwack. No crowd, no camera, just peace. Emily Grant never chased fame. She returned to her quiet life, her books, her woods. But her name now carried weight in circles that once doubted her. The longbow librarian, they called her. But for Emily, she was just doing what she'd always done, standing still, then aiming true. And somewhere in a quiet town, a little girl picks up a bow and remembers her name. May we all find the strength to stand firm in who we are, and may the quiet ones never be underestimated again. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share this with someone who's been underestimated, because sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never needed to shout. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever surprised someone with your hidden strength? We'd love to hear your story.